Okay, so good morning and thank you very much for joining us this morning for our session on taking your digital project for an idea into an investment. So just to go through some housekeeping rules first, just to say that this session is being recorded and it will be available on demand on the website afterwards. You'll see that there is a Q&A box for any questions for Julia or myself. We really do want this session to be as interactive as possible in a virtual world. So please do put any questions into the Q&A box and we will make sure that we can cover up as many of them as we can in the time that we have. You'll also see there's a chat box, and this is really for more any technical issues or technical support issues. And my colleague Rebecca is in the background and she'll be keeping an eye on them and answer any of those questions as they come in. And then just finally to check that your microphone is on mute. So I'm Joyce Harman and I'm a Senior Client Relationship Manager with Heart Square. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined this morning by Julia Morgan from WWF UK. Julia, if you'd like to introduce yourself. Oh, Julia, I think possibly you have frozen. And Julia's been having some technical issues this morning, so possibly what we can do is get Julia to log back in. So while we're waiting for Julia to do that, I will move on, and obviously we can get Julia when we get to the interview to introduce herself then. So quickly talking about Heart Square, for those of you who are not aware of us, really quickly just to say that we work only in the not-for-profit sector. We are impartial and independent from any technology provider or any technology. So that independence is really, really important to us. So I want to run a quick poll just to give us an idea of who's joining us this morning. So if you bear with me while I bring this up, and if I launch the poll. So what we are asking this morning is, what are the key challenges you face when embarking on a technology or a digital project? So if I could just ask you to fill that in. So it could be things like getting agreement on the focus of the project, understanding the requirements, where to start. This is often a really, really big challenge around projects. Staff availability and time, always a big one, and actually is coming up as quite a high percentage as well, so that's not surprising. Interesting that budget is quite low, so that's an interesting one as well. And nobody so far saying anything on focus of the project, so that's quite interesting. So let me just end the poll and share the results. Okay, so as you can see, the good thing that's interesting is nobody has said the focus of the project. So that's really reassuring, so that everybody is kind of clear that when you're embarking on your project, everybody knows what it is you're trying to do. But the where to start and understanding your requirements, that is definitely a big challenge. And not surprisingly, the resourcing, the staff availability and time, that is, the 50% one, the biggest one, but also some points around agreement on the priorities and the budget. So thank you very much for that. So if I stop sharing. So a conversation I regularly have with people is around, where should I start? As we all know, in organizations and charities and membership bodies, there's more than one challenge. There's more than one problem that needs to be fixed or addressed. And, it's very hard to know where to embark. I'm not going to talk through all of these, but very often conversations around, do we need to work on an engagement strategy? Do we need to work on a CRM strategy? We are doing an awful lot of manual work and processes. Should we carry out a business process review? But very often, sort of looking at the key questions. So for an example, if you are a membership body and your member renewals have been going down and you're not really sure why, you're not really sure what the engagement with your members has been, so you want to go away and you want to do some analysis to look at, for example, how many events have the members been attending, what content have they been downloading from the website, how often have they been contacting us. And so you go into your CRM system, for example, but actually the information isn't in there because the events program that you run is managed through a separate system, for example, something like Eventbrite. It's not connected into the CRM, and therefore it's a really manual process trying to gather that information together. You look at the website and you see, okay, well, actually, there's not that much content being downloaded. And actually, then you start to realize, well, actually, our content's very out of date. We haven't updated some of this content in a very long time, or our content's very generic. It's not in any way personalized to the different, donor categories or member categories, that we have. And then when you uncover it a bit more, you might say, okay, then we need to do a content strategy. We need to be a big drive for some new content. But actually, by going away and talking to the teams that are responsible for that, it actually turns out that the reason that the website is not up to date is because not that is you don't have content to put up there, but you're on an older system and back-end CMS website. And it's a really, really laborious and difficult process in order to update the website. Or that you actually have to go back to the technology partner in order for them to make the changes, and therefore that's cost and time. So actually, the issue really that needs to be solved is around, fixing the infrastructure to make it easier to regularly update the content so that people can do that. So very often what you think might be the problem might not be the full picture. So what we definitely suggest is, looking at all the different nuances of what the problem is, of what the challenge is, uncovering it in a bit more detail, and then putting together your business case around what is it you're trying to do. So really for me, the fundamental place to start is a business case. And people often, when you mention a business case, kind of go, oh, that's going to be a huge piece of work. It's going to be very laborious. It's going to be very challenging. We're going to need specialist help. But in essence, it's really quite a simple process. What you're trying to do in the purpose of a business case is trying to agree what is the problem that you're trying to solve. And the important point about the previous slide is focus. You cannot solve everything. It's about agreeing priorities, agreeing, the roadmap of what you're going to do it, and what phases things are going to be done in. The purpose of the business case is to support that decision making, to look at the different options that are available to you, getting clarity on the different options available to you. Then for those options, what are the costs associated with it? Costs are not just as simple as the cost of the implementation of the technology side of things. It is also things like resourcing, if you need backfill, all of those kind of things. But also, what are the implications for business as usual around those different options? Have we got the resources to do it? Have we got the capacity to do it? And putting all of this information into the business case. Really importantly, getting agreement, as I say, on the scope. So everybody's aligned about what the purpose is of this, and getting everybody to buy in for going forward. Because the purpose of the business case is to set a solid foundation for the project so that everybody is in agreement. So very simply, I kind of break down when thinking about a business case around what are the questions that need to be answered? What are the questions that this document must answer in order for us to be able to present it to the board or wherever it needs to go to get sign off, to get buy-in for the project. So the fundamental, and it may seem like an oversimplistic statement, is what is the problem we're trying to solve? Because very often it's very difficult to even get agreement on that, because there can be a lot of conflicting challenges. Different departments will have different priorities. But again, also thinking the business case in relation to back to what is your organizational strategy, so that it matches that the priorities are in the right area. So what is the problem that is trying to be solved? And then looking at the goals, what is it we're trying to achieve from this? Being realistic, because you're not going to do a project if there's no sort of definite goals or benefits at the end of it. So what is it that we are trying to achieve? But looking at your goals, being realistic. If it was, for example, it was when I was talking about a membership body, saying that we're having a problem with membership renewals, don't put in a goal to say that we want to make it that every single member stays with us, so we have 100% retention. Because depending on what's happening within the organization, that might be an unrealistic goal. Or, for example, in a charity, to saying we want to increase individual giving by 60%. Again, if your individual giving has only been going up year on year in very small percentages, why set yourself such a huge challenge? So being realistic about the goals that you want to achieve, make them attainable. Looking at the budgets and costs. So the budgets, often people think when you're talking about technology projects, is the implementation of the technology, but there is additional costs. Things you need to consider around licensing costs, resources. Do you have resources internally? Are you going to have to pay for backfill? What support costs will you need? What training costs? Making sure that you include all of them. Then on to resources. This is always a contentious issue, and I could talk about this one all day long. So on the resources side, looking at what you need for the project. So generally speaking, on a project, you will need a project sponsor, you will need a project manager, you will need a project lead, you will possibly need a data lead, you will have your subject matter experts. So there's a lot, and there can be many more. There's a lot of roles and responsibilities that are required on a project. So identifying those resources, but also looking at the internal staff, the people that are going to be testing the system and using the system. Have you got all the resources required? Have you got the skill sets required? Are you going to need some external help? And if so, where is that going to come from? Are you going to need backfill? And if so, where is that going to come from? Focusing on the benefits. So thinking about the benefits, which links to the goals, again, should be linking back to your organizational strategy, but being very clear on what it is you're expected to achieve from this project. And very much documenting that at the early stage in the business case stage, but then just not forgetting about it and going, we'll put it in the business case document and we're not going to think about it until afterwards. You need to be constantly thinking about this throughout the life cycle of the project. On roadmap and timelines, around that, it's very important that you are looking at realistic timelines, because you might have to do requirements gathering. How long is that going to take? If you're going out to market for a new system, how long will partner selection take? And then the implementation of any new technology. What time is required for discovery? What time is required for the actual implementation? So being realistic about the timeline, but also taking consideration for, if you run a big charity event every year, staff capacity, when does that happen? Don't put in a go live in the middle of something like that. And then finally, risks. There is risks on every project, and that's absolutely normal. That's to be expected. But at that early stage, when you're putting forward your bid for investment, putting together your business case, identify some of the key risks that you expect. Resourcing is generally always one, a risk on a project, but thinking about the risk, identifying them so that right from the start, you're thinking about how you can mitigate them. So when we do business cases, what we have found is historically, when the focus has just been on more the technical and factual side, so just looking at the options and the budgets and the roadmap, that if you're just focusing on that and you forget about the people and the buy-in, then the project won't be successful. So the buy-in and alignment is really important. So it's about, when you're developing your business case, when you're developing and agreeing what the scope is, what the priorities are, that you're communicating this with the wider organization, so that you're getting alignment in whatever the different levels that you have, either with the board, the senior management team, the CEO, the finance team, or the technical team, but also the wider organization. And that as part of your business case, you're putting in a communications plan so that everybody is aware and bought in. So then therefore, if you focus on these two key areas, then you've got much more likelihood of your business case getting approved, your project getting approved. So then finally, looking at some of the common mistakes that we see around a business case, and it's around asking for less budget than is required. So it's always an interesting conversation I have with people saying, well, we're not sure, we're going to get all the money that we want, so we'll ask for this. But then what will happen is, then you'll get that, and actually it turns out you needed further budget. So be realistic. Yes, it is a difficult conversation to have if the budget that you need is more than was going to be expected, but you have to be realistic, because you don't want to start the project and then have to go back to the board or the senior management team or whoever it is and say, actually, we now need more money. So being realistic from the budget right from the start is really, really important. having one person responsible from the project. So yes, you need the person who's going to be the main lead for the project, the main champion for the project, but it is a team project. You cannot simply have one person who's trying to do everything and take everything on. So really looking at who that is responsibility is, who is going to work, what that team is going to look like, and not just leaving it all to one person. And then finally, underestimating the project resources. So, as I've said before, resourcing is always a really, really challenging point on a project, because you have your project team structure, but you also have your business as usual. And you need to find the balance between being able to carry out business as usual, being able to deliver the project. But it's also really important to think about as well on the resourcing side, the skill set, because very often for example, when it comes things like writing test scripts, for example, or going into user acceptance testing and training, thinking about the skills that are needed for that. Have you got the skills, the staff in-house, have they got the skills that they need in order to be able to carry out those pieces of work? Do they need any additional training? Do they need any additional support? Or do you need some external support? So the resourcing side is not just the physical people to do the jobs, but it is also, have they got the skills? Are they the right type of people in order to do that? So now we're hopefully Julia is back with us. I'm just going to check. Julia, have you made it back in with us? Brilliant, fantastic, thank you. Nothing like a bit of technical things at the start there. So I suppose, yes, so obviously if you want to do a quick introduction of yourself, but also then I suppose with that, could you tell us a little bit about WWF UK and what you do?
Sure, yeah. So WWF is obviously known for their panda logo. So we're often seen as an animal charity, but we're actually a conservation charity that is working to reverse biodiversity loss. So big challenge there. Me personally, I'm the Director of Water Operations and Data Services. So look after our water care team, donation processing, but more relevant to this, our CRM team and our data warehouse integrations and campaign selections and everything that goes with that.
Perfect. And so you're currently in the process of a big project. So you're reviewing your technologies. So what's been the driver behind this? And kind of when I was talking about the business case, what are the challenges that you're trying to solve?
Yeah, so we did approach it from a what's the problem here point of view. And basically we found that our strategic objectives and ambitions of the organisation weren't something that we were going to be able to achieve with our current technology stack. So the challenge specifically was that our CRM is inefficient, it's outdated, so not all teams were using it. And that meant that we had lots of siloed pots of data around the organisation and lots of workarounds. And we found 15 tools and systems that people were using instead of the one CRM. And ideally it would be more than about 5. So we completed a review of the organisation, of all the tools we're using for the relationship management for across the whole organisation for anyone that was dealing with supporters. Interviewed stakeholder groups and found that people wanted to be able to personalise the experiences they were giving to supporters. They wanted frictionless ways for people to give, wanted greater transparency, and to be innovative and introduce new products quickly and keep up with other charities. And that's not something we could do with our current CRM. So it served us well, but it's time to change.
I like that. I also like that you just casually said we found about 15 different other sort of systems or ways of things that people are doing, and I think that's a really valid point. It's very often is that you might have a CRM, but that doesn't mean everybody's using it. So yeah, I think that's quite interesting. So how did you identify that the key requirements or the areas to focus on? Because you say that there was a few challenges, right? So how did you sort of agree the focus?
Well, it came out of the stakeholder interviews. We put together a lot of user stories. So we spoke to about 50 plus internal stakeholders to understand what they did and what they wanted to be able to do. And what they couldn't do with the tools they were currently using. And then we also held a series of workshops with mixed user groups. And we encouraged people to think of what the future could look like. And then work back from there and how we might get to that future state. And then we took everything, grouped it into epics, drew up some diagrams. So that was the key thing that was missing, was that there wasn't really anything that documented or drawn out. So a lot of information was in people's heads. People left, we lost valuable information. So we've drawn all of that up, and we did a current state versus future state gap analysis. And then when we analysed all that stuff, that enabled us to put together recommendations, timeline, suggested approach. But it took a long time. The review took about a year, and we had it was very business analysis led approach, and that's not really something the organisation had done before. So it was an education piece and what we were doing, and then actually holding the review. So it took a while, but it was really worthwhile.
No, thanks. And I think, you know, again, it's a really good point as well about the time it takes, because people think these things can be done really, really quickly. But if you know, to get the level of knowledge that you got, you know, with all the work that you did, you know, it's not something that's just going to be done overnight, and it takes a commitment as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So how did you go about getting agreement on, you know, from the rest of the management team on, you know, what the change was going to be, and you know, the always the famous one, the budget that's going to be required for it? So how did you get agreement on that?
Well, I've done a lot of talking. I have, well, first of all, we came to Hartsford, and we got a second opinion on the business case that we'd put together. Chris, our consultant we've been working with, completely stripped it back. We put all that information we found in a year, we put into this enormous business case, which no one was ever going to read. So he helped us really strip that back and focus on what it is that we were trying to achieve. Yeah, and then we have different levels of sign-off internally. So we have sort of like a fundraising comms type sign-off, and then a board and lots of people in between. So it was a case of presenting to all of them, but also, as you say, making sure that we were aligned with all of the other departments that were impacted. And I didn't actually get that right first time. So I was going through the formal process and neglected the informal side of things. And you know, I needed to have taken the time to talk to finance. I knew obviously it's a technology project, so I spent a lot of time talking with the director of IT. But yeah, I mean, since it's been fixed, and then that alignment has really helped the more senior people who are a bit further away from the project accept the fact that what we're recommending is good for the whole organisation. It's the project that needs to happen, and there are dependencies, you know, dependent projects that can't happen until this one has happened. So that's been really useful.
Yeah, and I think, yes, I mean, loads of good points there, but I think particularly around the kind of the length of the document. I mean, it might sound really simple, but it's a really good point of that you need to make it a document somebody will actually bother to read. Because I know that historically, on one of the slides I said before, but when people had just sort of focused on the technical and not the people side, it becomes shelfware, because everyone just goes, no, never going to read it, not going to engage with it. So, you know, a really good point. And that, yeah, that alignment and lots of conversations, you know, lots of talking, you know.
Yeah. And one thing that actually really struck me is every time I've been to a formal level of sign-off, it's obviously a mixed group. And I'm not the most technical person in the world either, but they were quite technical documents when we started. But everybody that then read it really appreciated that it had been written from a people-focused point of view, as opposed to a technical document, and they actually understood it and could really understand the benefits of doing it, as opposed to, you know, we're going to do all of these technical things that I don't understand and I'm not interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you have to think about your audience. You know, it's a bit like, isn't it, if you're trying to build something and you're given a set of instructions and you can't follow them, you're just not going to, and then you find out your IKEA shelf falls apart. But anyway, going off on tangents. So resourcing, I could talk all day long about it. So resourcing it's often a challenge on a project. So, you know, how did you identify the resources that you need and you're going to need, and how they're going to be delivered, and or is that something that you're still working on?
No, we included it in the business case, the size of the team that we wanted. And this isn't my first CRM replacement project. So I've seen some go well. I've seen some perhaps struggle because we didn't get the resourcing right. And fortunately for me, our organisation, there is a lot of people that worked on big projects. They know that, you know, you can fail, a project can fail completely because you've got people trying to do BAU and project work. So we set it out right at the start, and half of our budget actually we put forward for resourcing. And there was a bit of pushback, but once I explained what the roles we envisaged were and why we needed them all and how it all fitted together, people signed it off. And I did sort of like really basic, like one-side job descriptions for each of the roles and what they would be delivering, and that was really well received, especially because, you know, sign-off needs to be, for us, that includes HR and all those pieces. So getting buy-in on that as well has been important.
No, yeah, definitely. And I think it's interesting to say that, you know, yes, absolutely, you put in the budget for staff, because it really often gets forgotten. You know, because it is a huge commitment. You know, the staff time and resources is a huge commitment, and sort of those different roles.
I think as well, sorry, just another point on that one. I think it really helps having people that have worked on projects like this before. So I've been the person that's tried to do my BAU job and tried to do the project at the same time, and you know, it was successful, but I don't think I left the office for 6 months. So, you know, it's something that you're like, okay, it worked, but I wouldn't want to do it that way again. So it's good to be able to explain like the people side to the sign-off chain.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, completely agree. So have you identified the expected benefits from the project, and have you included those in the business case?
Yes and yes, but the business case was quite light touch on benefits. It was very sort of like, this is going to mean that we can integrate, this will mean that we've got somewhere we can pull all of our data. And I also gathered some case studies, so picked out a particular team and said for them it means, you know, they'll save X amount of time in admin every week, and they'll raise X amount extra per year, and also they've got this pot of data that doesn't have anywhere to sit at the moment, and that means we can do this with this. And then also did case studies for maybe a supporter group that it would benefit. And that was great for the business case. That's getting us through sign off. But the next, we then do a project initiation document as well, and we're putting together a full benefits realization strategy for that, so that we've got a set of KPIs that we can measure our impact on, because, you know, we want to be able to show the impact that it's had on the organization, and we've got a fairly strict strategy team, so they're asking for that anyway. And I think if you do have sort of a strategic team that's going to be signing things off, then they're going to be asking for that, so you need to put it in there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think it's that piece, isn't it, about putting it into the business case. But yeah, that project initiation document, that's a really good point, that it is put in there, because then everybody sees that it's a serious part of the project, it's a serious consideration that needs to be come back to and looked at throughout the life cycle of the project, and not just sort of, we think about the start and we get to the end and then go, oh, we haven't really delivered on any of these.
Yeah, I mean, number one benefit is replacing the CRM, but there are people benefits as well, and you know, we want to make sure that we realise those as well.
Just actually sort of one question on that around the sort of the different benefits, and I know you're working on it at the moment. Are you sort of envisaging sort of assigning sort of different people or to different areas around the benefits around sort of that project plan? Or just wondering what your approach was on that. And you can equally say we haven't thought about that yet.
You haven't thought about that yet, but I will now. And I think it is something that we need to realise. One of the things I have done is within the roles, think about. So we've got a role that is specifically looking after the subject matter experts and their experience of working on the project, to make sure that we maximise consistency across the project, but also we don't waste their time. We record everything, and we try and make sure that we, you know, not everyone gets everything they ask for. We say, well, have you thought about this as a new way of working? And that's certainly something we thought about. We sort of thought about what we wanted to achieve, and then work backwards to think about the roles that we needed to achieve that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what tips would you give to any organisations sort of embarking on a new project, or embarking either a business case or trying to get buy-in for their project? What would your top tips be?
Well, the first one for our review, first of all, do a review, because that has been so valuable. And, you know, all the data we've got now is what's got us through approval. So do a review. On the back of that, get a good project manager and a good business analyst who can commit to the whole project, and hopefully for us, the same project manager and business analyst is going to continue from the review all the way through the CRM, so we've got that consistency there. But also understand who your stakeholders are, have those conversations. I do feel like I talk about it constantly, and it's all I do, but it's really important. It's a big investment, it's a lot of money, so you know, people do need the buy-in. And also, yeah, as you said, don't underestimate the number of people you need in a, yeah, if you think you can do it on 5, maybe you get 6. Yeah, and be open to input, I suppose, is an important thing for me. I'm not a technical expert. I love a database, but as a user, as opposed to someone who's ever built one. So I've talked to a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of colleagues, people around the WF network, potential suppliers, people from other charities, been to lots of webinars and things like this, just to try and make sure I know what's happening. Yeah, and I suppose the other one is be clear on your message. Don't put all your technical information in your business case. Just be clear on what you're trying to achieve and what you want people to sign off, basically.
Perfect, thank you. We've had lots of questions come in. So let me see. So did you have any challenges on getting colleagues on board with the project that they perhaps didn't see it as essential? That was an interesting question.
I think at WF, a lot of people use our current CM. So they do understand that it's out of date. Probably more of the challenge has been why people understanding why they can't just use what they're currently using, and also why we're doing it now, because we've got a lot of projects going on at the moment and a lot of other systems, like trying to convince people that actually we need to get this one right, and that means that other projects will benefit later on down the line. So yeah, so it's more people were concerned about why we were doing it now, and also the impact it would have on BAU for everybody involved, because it's obviously a big project.
No, yeah, that makes sense. Then another question was, what were the elements in your business case that you felt was most critical to get buy-in from the stakeholders?
I found that each stakeholder needed something different. So, for example, the people that dealt with supporters directly were really interested in the benefits for the supporter. And then finance, obviously interested in the budget. And so it was a case of, for me, it was the informal conversations and getting those questions in advance then meant that when we submitted the business case, we did a presentation with each one to get sign off. I was able to include those questions specifically within there. So having the case study about the impact it would have on the BAU was important, and having the impact on what the future world would look like for supporters was important as well.
Perfect. Question on resourcing. I love a question on resourcing. Can you expand a bit? Can you expand a bit on estimating the project resources? How did you decide what role, skill set you were going to need on the project teams, and if they should be allocated to the project full time? Well, that's an interesting one.
I decided quite early on that I wanted a dedicated team. So we've got 7 roles within the team that are full time, and what we decided that we were going to try and fill up as many full-time roles as we could, so perhaps for people with multiple skills, and that we would ask people to second internally if we had the skills in place, and give people the opportunity to apply. And then the other roles, we haven't done this yet, but we will do soon, we'd go externally for skills. And what we did is we looked at, that was after we'd collated all of the user stories and the epics, and we looked at what we needed to do, and where we were starting from, so how big the gap was. So our data, for example, we've had it all within our current CRM for 16 years. And we've also just built a new cloud data warehouse that we're transferring everything in so that we can put the rest of our data in. But because of that, because it's all been in the same place so long, it needs a lot of work and a lot of cleaning. So we looked at that sort of challenge, like, okay, we probably need 2 data roles, but it would be good to have those people that could do all of it, including with testing and everything. So we looked at we looked at the gap and what was needed, and built out the roles from there. Yeah, so it's a personal preference. I prefer to have people full-time on a project rather than split between BAU and project. But obviously the subject matter experts will be split between they'll do it on top of their BAU work, but we're aiming to give them enough time in advance so that it's not onerous, and that hopefully they only have to go through the process once.
Yeah, absolutely, makes sense. A question's come in. I'm not sure if you can necessarily answer this one yet, but I shall ask it to you anyway, if you might have an opinion. Can you talk about the process of selecting a suitable technology provider, and whether you found exactly what you wanted, or if there was a need to build in new features?
We're just sort of at that point. Yeah, so we haven't been through, for this one, we haven't been through a tender. yet. We're hopefully going out next month. Me personally, I'm not expecting to find something perfect, but we have put in design principles from the start. So we're looking for a partner that can provide something that's pre-built, so we don't have to build from scratch. And then we will then minimize our customization, but try and configure what's available to anything that's particular to our charity. We do a lot of memberships and adoptions, so we're hoping to find someone that's already got something that will manage that. And then the stuff that we don't have within our CRM is a lot of our corporate partnership management, philanthropy. That's probably where we're thinking we might have to do a bit more configuration. So we're not expecting to find something perfect, but we want to find something that's not an absolute start from scratch.
Yeah, no, absolutely, isn't it? You avoid going down that bespoke route, because that'll also help with keep costs down as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Another question was, are there any other project documents that I should be doing alongside putting together a business case? Oh, that's good. Yeah, good question.
Yeah. I'd say the documentation, the diagrams has been useful for us. So the one of the assets that we produced on the back of the full analysis of the relationship management is an ecosystem of all of our systems, and then a future state of what we'd be able to get rid of. So you can do a bit of a cost analysis there. But also just like the core system, the core processes that weren't documented, we put those together. I'm not sure people have looked at them yet, but it will be useful for the project. Then the user stories have been brilliant, because we're now currently translating those into requirements for our tender document, which is getting to about 100 pages long. So that'll be fun for everyone to read. But that has been invaluable to say exactly what we want. And we haven't been prescriptive in terms of we want it to work in this way. We just need something that can do this.
Perfect. Another question. Has your project thrown up any surprises, good or bad, that you weren't expecting?
I've had lots of questions I wasn't expecting. Nothing bad, particularly. Thought-provoking, potentially. Yeah, it's actually been a really good experience for me. I've only been at WWF for less than 2 years, so it's been really good getting to know the processes and trying to understand what it takes to get something of this size signed off. I think I underestimated the length of time it would take to get full approval. But that's good, because people are asking good questions about things like benefits realization, and I perhaps wouldn't have gone into so much detail had I not had those questions. And then the challenge then was like, well, how do we plan for something when we don't even know what system we're getting yet? So yeah, it's been challenging, but not bad, I'd say.
And yeah, so I'm actually following on from that. Have you put in place, or are you planning on, any sort of formal communications plan? Is how much consideration is that being taken at this stage, or is that something that you're looking at after?
It's definitely something we need to do. I think the user group for our current CM is huge. So we are talking about that, and I've been socializing it sort of with the people who are most impacted. So my team, for example, I've been through it all with them. Bit of bells and whistles type presentation, everyone got some chocolate, but we have like quite regular, we have a weekly stand-up for the full organization. So we'll sort of do a launch of the project on that. Once we've got a bit further down, we can say what we're going with. And then we were thinking it's probably, monthly newsletter type thing. But hopefully someone from our comms department will help us get that right.
Yeah, absolutely. And then thinking about, I know you're not at that stage, you're hopefully you're going out with the ITT in the next month or so. But at that sort of initial planning stage, one of the things that often comes up is a challenge around, should I say maybe say challenge, around who's going to be on the final board for the sort of the final panel when you're going to select the technology partner, because there's often that challenge of you don't want too many people because it becomes too much of a committee and then you'll never get a decision, or not having enough people so people don't think enough people are bought in. Have you had any consideration of how you're going to sort of structure that panel, and is that something you think that would be good to put into a business case?
Yes, definitely. That having names on the board before sign off is really reassured. Our CAO, for example, COO, was very keen to have the IT director on there and the finance director, which obviously makes sense. So they're both on the board. But then I was very keen to make sure that the user group was represented and that the supporters had a voice on the panel as well. So again, we looked at the benefits and what we were looking to deliver and made sure there was someone representing each of those benefits on the board. And, you know, we also had to make sure in enough time that people were going to be able to clear their diaries. It's a big process to go through. So yeah, it's been really important and something that people wanted to know before they were willing to sign off as well.
Yeah, perfect. Another question. Have you involved or gathered any information, stroke requirements from any external stakeholders, for example, donors, funders, etc., when carrying out your review?
We haven't. We have taken it into account in terms of what they might want, and we do have a sort of supporter panel that we can go to with questions. So we haven't at this point asked what it is that they'd like to see, but we do ask them questions every month in terms of, if we did this, would that be good? And if we did that, would that be good? So that's sort of, it's not officially part of the project, but it is something that we do anyway. And we've previously done a review with our philanthropic audience. Again, another group that it's not serviced well with our current CRM. So we've currently got a separate standalone system that they use, and that's something that has been reviewed as part of the scope of the project, and something that further down the line, it's not part of the initial project, but that's something we would look to bring into the new CRM ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. I suppose, yeah, which kind of follows on to your point. There was a question around, yeah, how have you gone about reviewing your technologies, and what role did you assign to the lead as part of this project? I suppose it's more around that, you know, obviously the big challenge is around the CRM, but obviously you've got lots of other technologies. So yeah, was it a view of we're just going to focus on CRM for now, but being aware of what all the other systems are, you know? Yeah, so what was your thinking on that?
The way that we've structured it is that it's a phased project. The first phase is replace the current CRM, but then phase 2 is to review the other systems and integrate those. So basically phase 1 is replace care, but also provide something that gets rid of the spreadsheets and the manual workarounds. So that's the phase 1. And then we've got other supplementary systems, some of which we'll keep and integrate, and some we will move away from and add modules to the current CRM. So they've all been reviewed as part of the project, and that's part of the big epics that we formed. We then arranged the epics into, like, this will be phase 1, this will be phase 2, and then we'll reassess before we do a phase 3, because everything will have changed by then.
Absolutely, that's the thing, exactly. Phase 3 seems a long way off. Another question, so I'm conscious I'm just firing questions at you, Julia.
No, that's fine.
What roles did you find key to driving the change? And if you were to do it again, are there any roles that you'd bring in or change?
Does that mean in terms of roles within the people that did?
Yeah, I suppose, yeah, it could kind of be either way. Either, yeah, the roles that you've assigned, sort of people within the developing the business case, I suppose, or because I suppose it's a bit too early to sort of say, because you haven't obviously delivered the project yet. So maybe sort of that early stage.
Well, within the review, there were 4 of us working on it. Project manager, who has loads of experience of working at WWF and knew the landscape really well. It was actually one of our IT project managers, so really good background. We brought in a business analyst that was with experience of technology projects, because we didn't have that internally, and they were responsible for collating all the user stories. And then also we've had what we've called our technical visionary, just to put him on the spot. He is a member of my team who really broad understanding of CRM, but really broad understanding of what technology can do at the moment. Has worked in other charities perhaps a bit further down the road than we are, and has a really good overview of what technologies we might use and how they might work together. So he's been invaluable on it as well. Again, he's like sort of like the technical view on the project, and then I represent those that just like using databases.
Perfect, thank you. Then another question just came in. It was interesting to hear about the different stages of your project. Do you have an idea of how many different systems you want to end up with? I'm assuming that you want to streamline and automate systems as much as possible.
do want to streamline and automate systems as much as possible. We have some really old ways of working at the moment, which means that a lot of time and a lot of people have to do like really quite manual things like change addresses and, you know, cancel crypto bits and things like that, which is all stuff that could be automated with better technology. And, you know, with the ambitions to grow our supporter base, you'd end up with like hundreds of people having to do all those changes. So yeah, so streamlining and automation is number one. I don't foresee us getting rid of all of the supplementary systems. Anyone who works in a charity will know that there's a system called First Class that legacy teams can't live without. So we'll be looking to integrate that into the ecosystem. I keep calling it ecosystem. But there'll be other systems that we'll try and move away from, because it will be a cost saving, but also having as much data as we can on the same platform will be great in terms of not having to have quite so many APIs. So yeah, so in terms of maintenance, it'll be much easier if we have maybe, who knows, maybe about 5 different systems playing nicely together, but one main one.
And I think it's a really good question and a really good point, isn't it? Because it's not just about getting rid of everything and having one system to do everything. As you say, you know, if you've got a best of breed system that works really well for you know, for that particular team, why change it? But your point, make sure it's integrated so that you know, everything is connected. You know, I think
absolutely
that's a really good point.
That's number one really in our requirements, is that something that's easily integratable. And it might be that we don't end up with one core platform, and that we have, this is a hybrid right from the start, and we have a system that does this bit and the system that we haven't actually decided on the technology yet. So we'll see who convinces us. But yeah, we know that not one system is the best for everything, and we just need to be open to plugging things in when we need to.
Yeah, and I know from sort of some conversations we'd had as well, is very often in some organizations, and I'm not saying it is a WWF, there can be sort of a tendency to say we're going to go with this X technology, but very much, you know, to your point of having that open mind, you know, you haven't chosen technology yet, you haven't made a decision because you want to look at the different options. And I think that's a really good point, because sometimes there can be presumptions made about what different systems or different platforms and things can do, but having that open approach when you've got your clear set of requirements, and then seeing how those different technologies, different partners can deliver against them. I think that, yeah, that's a really good point as well. Okay, I'm going to go for last question. I've been asking so many at you. So an interesting one. So what metrics are you using to define success? It's that classic ROI question. It's a tricky one, and I'm not sure necessarily how you can answer it, but just sort of, yeah, interested sort of how you're approaching that. I suppose for me, why I say interesting question is we often get asked, well, we need to show ROI on this project, and then the board generally always just thinks about money, and it's not all just about money. So you're just sort of interested in your view on that question.
Yeah, well, that's why we're doing this benefits realization strategy. So we're not at the point where we've got clear KPIs like percentage growth. I was actually just looking at this before I came on the call, and yeah, so we're looking at, you know, do we have a central data place to put all of our data, where all the sources are put together, and, you know, the analysis is running from this place, and we've got a good segmentation on the back of it, and that is great, is driving growth. As I say, we haven't got the figures on it yet, but it's looking at, you know, by future year, when we agree on what that is, what 2030 is when we're trying to achieve our current organizational strategy. Like, have we used the technology to achieve all of it? We know we can't achieve it at the moment. So if we hit those organizational strategy goals using the technology we put in place, then we've done a good thing. But yeah, we're going to need to make it a lot more detailed for the project initiation document to get that through. So yeah, we're working on it now.
Yeah, because it comes up on, you know, every conversation with people around that dreaded ROI and metrics question. But I think it, to your point, being realistic, and also, you know, it's not all about immediate quick wins.
No.
There's often a sort of a bit of an obsession that we must get some quick wins. I suppose, yeah, was there pressure on you around that at all?
Yeah, there was, and that's part of the reason why we've already replaced our data warehouse. So that is something which we're getting done before we start the CRM, so that we can start on the analysis, so we can be looking at, you know, putting together our segmentation while, you know, the rest of the CRM is happening. And yeah, so that's going to go live in a few months. And that's, although not a quick win, 'cause that's also taken a year, it's a quicker win than a whole CRM replacement. And I think as well, it's really important to have metrics and to have these benefits so that you can celebrate your success at the end and remind people why you're doing it, because it's not an easy project. So yeah, it's important for morale as much as anything else.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's, your point as well around, milestones, because these are not quick projects. They're not, they're not going to be done overnight. So celebrating the successes as well, throughout, and keeping, as you're saying, you're working on communications plans and things like that, but making sure that everybody knows what's happening. And when something good happens, because very often the problem with these type of projects is people just want to talk about the things that have gone wrong, or the challenges, or you get into user acceptance testing and it's all very challenging and hard work, and training's much more complicated than people thought. So it's that, that communication of things are going well, we are starting to see benefits. It's really, really important.
I think that bit's really important as well, because there's brand new ways of working here. It's going to take a culture change as well, and that's not something that happens overnight. It's something we need to be building up on. That's going to be a real challenge when we get to it.
Perfect. Well, I think I've covered off all of the questions that have come in. Julia, thank you so much. I could happily talk to you all day long. Some really, really key, points and takeaways there. And I think, for me, that there's so many of them, but a couple of really good nuggets is around the bit about the language, not writing a technical document, putting a document together that people can understand. So then if they can understand it, then you can have those conversations. And, to your earlier point around people asking questions you weren't expecting, I thought that was really quite interesting, which then, probably helps shape and, the document and sort of the process as well. And being realistic on timelines, very, very important. And also the resourcing, because again, it's always a real challenge. So thank you so much. That has been really useful. And thank you everybody for joining us. Any other final thoughts from you, Julia, before we sign off?
I just think, just don't underestimate the challenge, and look after yourself as well. There's a well-being theme that we could probably talk about as well, but it is a hard project, and it's important to look after your team and just check in on everybody. And good luck if you're going to do it.
Absolutely, exactly. So thank you so much, Julia, for joining us this morning, and everybody else, and hopefully we will see you again on another session so shortly. Tongue-tied. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.